This documentary should not exist. Doctors and scientists have been sentenced to prison for exposing the information presented within, and the governments of the world would rather you never laid your eyes upon it, for the blood of millions is on their hands. And indeed, much credit is due to the blood, the sweat, and the tears of all of those who sacrificed so much to get their stories on film. And although this documentary should not exist, it must exist, for it tells a story which has never been properly told, a story that affects every single living creature on Earth, a story of which for the first time in history that you can actually make a difference in, and with almost zero effort on your part. You won't even have to spend any money or change your lifestyle. All you must do is watch for the next 179 minutes with your full attention. But make no mistake, there may be moments where you'll want to close your eyes and cry and pretend that this isn't happening. However, remain strong and do not falter, for the creatures of earth depend upon you, and the heavens shall be your reward. The next 2 hours will be a nightmare beyond description, a journey through hell and back. But if you stay the course, the final hour will offer you a truly glorious solution.
We are announcing roughly $8 billion in loan guarantees to break ground on the first new nuclear plant in our country in 3 decades. The first new nuclear power plant in nearly 3 decades. And this is only the beginning. My budget proposes tripling the loan guarantees we provide to help finance safe, clean nuclear facilities. See, our competitors are racing to create jobs and command growing energy industries. And nuclear energy is no exception. Japan and France have long invested heavily in this industry. Meanwhile, there are 56 nuclear reactors under construction around the world, 21 in China alone, 6 in South Korea, 5 in India. I know it's been long assumed that those who champion the environment are opposed to nuclear power. But the fact is, even though we've not broken ground on a new nuclear power plant in 30 years, nuclear energy remains our largest source of fuel that produces no carbon emissions. To meet our growing energy needs and prevent the worst consequences of climate change, we'll need to increase our supply of nuclear power. It's that simple.
NBC News consultant, physics professor Michio Kaku. Professor, we've seen the helicopters dropping water on the site. If that doesn't work, what's next?
That helicopter dropping borated water is like a squirt gun trying to put out a forest fire. Too little, too late. I think we're extremely close now to the point of no return. Just a few more slight glitches, and we're going to be in an uncontrolled breach of containment. That is a Class 7 accident. That is a full-scale Chernobyl.
You think meltdown's inevitable at this point?
Almost inevitable. At a certain point, the workers going into that site will be on a suicide mission. They will have to abandon ship. And without anyone taking care of the reactor cores, we will have 3 simultaneous breach of containments. Already, Units 2 and Unit 3 have cracks in their containment vessels. Already, Unit 4 has a raging fire, we think, involving spent fuel that is not contained by any containment vessel. So we are very close now to something that is even bigger than Chernobyl.
So, Professor, what's the worst-case scenario look like in that area 12 miles around the reactor if, in fact, there is a meltdown? I mean, are people going to die within that region? What about the radiation plume?
In a worst-case scenario, you have breach of containment. The containment structure springs a leak. You have an explosion. The thing cracks apart and releases large quantities of radiation into the atmosphere. That area will become a dead zone. It will be impossible to grow anything. People in that area will die. We're talking about lives at stake. And that's why I would say, if I had the ear of the Prime Minister, forget about using squirt guns. Call in the Japanese Air Force. Hit that reactor with concrete, sand, and boric acid. Seal it in a sarcophagus. Entomb it just like the Soviets entombed the Chernobyl accident in 1986. I think we're very close to that option now.
We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Kaku, our thanks.
To discuss this issue, we're joined by British journalist George Monbiot in London. He's an author, columnist with The Guardian of London. He's written in favor of nuclear energy after the Fukushima disaster. George Monbiot, why don't you begin? Why doesn't what is happening now in Fukushima concern you when it comes to nuclear power worldwide?
Well, obviously what's happening in Fukushima concerns me a lot about the area surrounding Fukushima. It's a horrible, dangerous, extremely traumatic series of events that we are seeing there. But I'm very worried that the global response to what's happening in Fukushima will be to shut down nuclear power stations around the world and to cancel future nuclear power stations, and that what will happen is that they will be replaced by coal. Now, coal is hundreds of times more dangerous than nuclear power, not just because of climate change, though of course climate change is the big one, but also because of industrial accidents and because of the impacts of pollution on local people. If we just look at industrial accidents alone, these massively outweigh both the fatalities and the injuries caused by any nuclear accident we've ever seen. In China alone, last year, 2,300 people were killed in industrial accidents to do with coal mining. Purely by coal mining accidents, 2,300 killed. That's 6 people a day. That means that in 1 week, the official death toll from coal in China is greater than the official death toll from Chernobyl in 25 years.
We are going right now to Burlington, Vermont, to speak with Arnie Gundersen, former nuclear industry senior vice president who's coordinated projects at 70 nuclear power plants around the country. Arnie Gundersen provides independent testimony on nuclear and radiation issues to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and congressional and state legislatures, as well as government agencies and officials in the U.S. and abroad. Now chief engineer at Fairwinds Association, he co-wrote the new Greenpeace report, Lessons from Fukushima. What are these lessons, Arnie Gundersen?
Well, I think the first lesson is that this is a technology that can destroy a nation. I was reading Mikhail Gorbachev's memoirs, and he claims that it was Chernobyl, not perestroika, that destroyed the Soviet Union. And as you look at the transcripts coming out of Japan, we see that the Fukushima accident was on the verge of causing the evacuation of Tokyo. And had the wind been blowing the other way, across the island instead of out to sea, Japan would have been cut in half and destroyed as a functional country. So this is a technology where perhaps accidents don't happen every day, but when they do, they can destroy a country. The other things are the cost is astronomical. To fix this is going to be something on the order of $500 billion. All of the money that Japan saved on oil over the 40 years that they've had nuclear plants just got thrown away in the $500 billion recovery effort. And the other piece is the human issues. The health impacts to the Japanese will begin to be felt in several years and out to 30 or 40 years from cancers. And I believe we're going to see as many as a million cancers over the next 30 years because of the Fukushima incident in Japan.
I am Carl Grossman. This coming April 26th marks the 25th anniversary of the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster. Meanwhile, the nuclear industry worldwide is pushing for a revival of nuclear power, and this very important book has been published, Chernobyl: Consequences of the Catastrophe for People and the Environment, and it concludes, based on now available medical data, that between 1986, the year of the accident, and 2004, 985,000 people died as a result of the disaster, and more have been dying since. With us is Dr. Janet Sherman. She's the contributing editor of this book, which was authored by a noted Russian biologist, Dr. Alexei Yablokov, Vasily Nestorenko, and Alexei Nestorenko. They're both from Belarus. Welcome, Janet. How did these people die? I mean, we're talking 1 million people dead from this nuclear plant accident. How?
They died of multiple different kinds of diseases, from cancer to heart disease, brain damage, thyroid cancer, but many, many children died in utero, in other words, before they were born, or died of birth defects after they were born.
How did these scientists determine 985,000 deaths as a result of Chernobyl?
Based on medical data that were available to the scientists.
Now, what we've heard, frankly, since the accident, from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the global group which is supposed to regulate and promote nuclear power, the casualties of Chernobyl, well, currently the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, on its website says maybe in all be 4,000 people dead. Now that's quite different from 985,000. Why this discrepancy?
Well, they released a report called the Chernobyl Forum, and they only included about 350 articles available in the English language. But Drs. Yablokov and the two Nestorenkos looked at well over 5,000 articles. And the people who were actually, we hate to use the term, but boots on the ground, people who were there and saw what was going on. We're talking about medical doctors, scientists, veterinarians, epidemiologists who saw what was happening when people in their communities were getting sick and dying.
I'm suggesting to everybody that we at all times leave on our masks and keep our hoods up, because there's always the possibility of radioactive dust particles, and we just need to be extraordinarily careful from this point on. You can see the cranes, which are still over reactor 5 and 6. You can see the sarcophagus, which is surrounding the exploded reactor. They built the cement tomb to try and control the radioactivity inside, but because they had to build it in a hurry, it's actually in a very fragile condition. There's like untold quantities of water which comes in as rainfall through the cracks, and it's literally hanging and the roof is about to collapse inside. And yet in 1986 it only spewed out about 3% of its full potential, and the balance is actually still remaining inside, which is a very scary thought. And the scientists say that the next Chernobyl will be Chernobyl itself.
Maybe when you come here, do you get scared?
I'm terrified. I really am. I really am. But I'm actually probably more emotional than terrified, really, to be honest. It's just to think that that innocuous little complex over there, that building, has caused the destruction of 9 million lives, half of which are children under the age of 5. You know, there's nothing that shows the sort of violence of what came out of there, because, I mean, radiation is invisible. So I suppose my predominant emotion is of like really deep sadness, especially when you know the kids and, you know, you see the look in their eyes, you know, the children that know themselves that there's no hope in their future. And to know that it came from this, you know, something that was not of their making.
What's the reading now?
11,000. 12 is your average background radiation that you get in New York or in Dublin and Ireland. This is 1,000 times greater than the normal background level of radiation. We're in extreme danger now. Anything, if we stay any longer, we'll be really foolish. So I'm suggesting we all pull out. Okay, guys?
Yeah.
I can't believe that we're still getting the readings inside. I'm stunned. I've never seen levels like this before. I mean, my only concern is that there was a leak today and that would be giving us these kind of readings. I mean, we will never know that because nothing will ever be acknowledged officially. It's probably a regular occurrence, but that's the only explanation that I could have for these kind of readings. This is the thyroid center in Minsk, which is the biggest thyroid center in Belarus, possibly the biggest in the world, because they have the biggest number of cases of that particular cancer.
А у вас тоже щитовидка у всех, да? Да. Все, да? И ты тоже? Все. А можно так посмотреть? Покажите, что у вас было. А вы все из Гомельской области или сразу? Breast region as well.
Is it painful to talk?
Болит даже разговаривать, да?
Ну, чего болит? Я вообще скажу, что трошки, да.
Okay, we're sorry, we're not going to make him talk.
А сколько твоих друзей, вот у которого прооперирован?
3 друга.
3 friends of him.
В группе молодых людей, тех, которые как раз-таки попали, будучи детьми и подростками, под аварию на Чернобыльской АЭС. Вот, естественно, что в этой группе сейчас имеется рост. И их достаточно много.
I was born on the 3rd of April, and 1986, and Chernobyl disaster was on the 26th of April, also 1986. So I think because of this, I have some problems with my back.
Do you know what's wrong with you? Do you have thyroid cancer?
Not exactly.
No.
No.
Does he know?
А что у меня за диагноз?
Потом скажу.
He's going to tell you later on, not in her.
Мы обычно в палатах не говорим.
Do you need an operation?
Yeah. I'll have an operation on Wednesday, I think. Perhaps.
And then you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think.
That's good.
Both they have cancer. One has been operated and one is
They
still
don't
with.
know?
No, they don't
You
know.
didn't tell them?
Вы не говорите им, да? Детям?
Нет, детям
No. His parents, their parents know, but not kids.
Are they going to be okay?
Ну, у них прогноз хороший, будет все хорошо.
Это будет ясно уже после получения гистологического заключения. Вот, естественно, например, как у нас.
Как биопсия, да?
Да, то есть биопсия. Когда мы будем знать степень распространения, то есть наличие поражения лимфоузлов, опять же, то есть тогда мы можем более конкретно это прогнозировать.
And we're joined by Helen Caldicott, world-renowned anti-nuclear advocate, author, and pediatrician, co-founder of Physicians for Social Responsibility, has spent decades warning of the medical hazards of nuclear technologies.
A new report from the New York Academy of Sciences has just translated 5,000 papers from Russian into English. It's the most devastating report I've ever seen. Up to 1 million people have already died from Chernobyl. And people will continue to die from cancer for virtually the rest of time.
The United Nations Committee did examine Chernobyl, and they said that so far the death toll from Chernobyl amongst both workers and local people is 43. When I've been dealing with climate change over the past 20 years or so, I learned very quickly that you have to effectively go with the scientific consensus rather than with a few outlier papers, because to choose those outlier papers over the scientific consensus is effectively to cherry pick or to data mine and to get what turns out to be a misleading view. That's certainly been my experience with climate change.
A United Nations press release published by the World Health Organization in conjunction with the International Atomic Energy Agency does indeed state that less than 50 people have died thus far from Chernobyl, but they also do admit that about 4,000 children contracted thyroid cancer. But according to the United Nations, this thyroid cancer has a 99% survivability rate, making it the most survivable form of cancer in the world according to the United Nations. Yet it appears there are still people left at the UN with a conscience. Take this statement by Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations. Chernobyl is a word we would all like to erase from our memory. It opened up Pandora's box of invisible enemies and nameless anxieties in people's minds, but which most of us probably now think of as safely relegated to the past. Yet there are two compelling reasons why this tragedy must not be forgotten. First, if we forget Chernobyl, we increase the risk of more such technological and environmental disasters in the future. Second, more than 7 million of our fellow human beings do not have the luxury of forgetting. They are still suffering every day as a result of what happened 14 years ago. Indeed, the legacy of Chernobyl will be with us and with our descendants for generations to come.
Now, on these questions that Helen raises, I mean, if she's honestly saying that the World Health Organization is now part of the conspiracy and the cover-up as well, then the mind boggles. Where does this end?
The mind does boggle.
Them and the UN Scientific Committee and the IAEA, and I mean, who else is involved in this conspiracy? We need to know.
To try to understand how it is that the governments and the governments of the world, who are after all people just like you, can permit the exposures of people to these substances when these substances are killing them and killing their children and causing increases in cancer. The way in which this works is that in 1952, at the beginning of the manufacture of all of these bombs, when they needed the bombs in order to stop the Soviet Union from taking over the planet, they developed an organization called the International Commission on Radiological Protection, the ICRP. And this organization assessed the health of exposure to radiation. But the real purpose of this organization was to set limits to radiation exposure, which permitted the military to continue making bombs. Now, in order to make bombs, you have to have plutonium. And in order to get plutonium, you have to have nuclear energy, because that's where you make the plutonium. So the period from 1952 to 1965, say, was a period of expansion of the development of nuclear energy. And parallel with this, of course, was the production of plutonium by the nuclear energy reactors in order to make bombs. Now the ICRP calculated the relationship between radiation and health on the basis of an idea called absorbed dose. Absorbed dose is energy per unit mass, so it's energy divided by mass. Now the energy is energy that comes from the outside, external radiation. But this is okay as a method for assessing radiation from the outside, like from an atom bomb, but it doesn't work for measuring radiation from the inside, which is like something that you see here, which is like a little particle of radioactive plutonium, which is creating a lot of damage in one part of the cells. Here, there's one, there's another one, but nothing anywhere else. So you can think about sitting in front of a fire, a warm fire, and warming your body, and all of the energy goes into your body and warms it up, and you divide that energy by the weight, by the mass of your body in kilograms, and that gives you your dose. But you can get the same dose by reaching into the fire and picking out a hot coal and eating it, same dose. And this represents the error, the mistake, that is built in to the current system of radiation protection. And because of this mistake, which is not really a mistake, which is a scheme, which was set up in 1952 and is still with us, millions of people have died, millions.
One special phase of the study concerned the amount of radiation that would pass through the human body. This required instrumentation in the stomach. A small capsule was devised as a film stack with alternate bits of film and spacers. Secured with a string and paraffin coated, the capsule is swallowed. One end of the string hangs out of the mouth so that the capsule can be retrieved after exposure and the radiation measured.
Gamma radiation may do its damage in either of two major ways, or both. One, it may physically and directly destroy tissue or eventually cause the development of some kind of cancer. Those which concern us principally have life periods ranging from several years to thousands of years. They can do no harm unless they are taken into our bodies with food or drinking water, or in the air we breathe.
Let us consider the results of a powerful thermonuclear explosion at the Pacific Proving Grounds in the Marshall Islands, 11 degrees north of the equator. The huge cloud soars up, punches through the tropopause, and finally spreads and stabilizes as high as 70 or 80,000 feet, entirely within the stratosphere layer.
This brings us to the most widely discussed fission product, strontium-90. Chemically similar to the soil calcium with which it becomes mixed, the strontium-90 follows calcium through its regular cycles into our plant food and into the bones, meat, and milk of our plant-eating animals. Reaching our own bodies, the strontium-90, like calcium, tends to be concentrated in our bones, particularly those of children who are building new bones. The radiation from strontium-90 has extremely short range in the body, so it causes no genetic threat to the reproductive cells. It does pose a threat to the bone marrow and the bone itself in the form of either leukemia or bone cancer. If this should happen, it would be a tragic thing for those injured, no matter how small the number. Whether these statistically very few casualties can be justified is a personal value judgment outside the scope of this report. Each citizen must make his or her own evaluation. There are those few who loudly maintain that there is no actual threat to the free world at all, certainly none that can justify either nuclear testing or nuclear armament. The opposite viewpoint holds that the development of our nuclear power has been an absolutely necessary protection against communist hostility and nuclear threats. In this view, the fallout casualties, if any, will be seen as those of unidentified soldiers in the service of humanity. Unknown soldiers in a war which has not struck, and which our nuclear power may indeed prevent from ever striking.
The governments of the world, those that lead the United Nations and comprise the UN Security Council, would like you to believe that the number of people afflicted with cancers, birth defects, and other radiation-related illnesses from the fallout of over 2,000 nuclear weapons detonations is statistically insignificant. But in order for that to be the case, the United Nations would also need you to believe that a full-scale nuclear meltdown like Chernobyl would only kill about 2 people a year. However, bear in mind that the average nuclear warhead only contains about 20 pounds of nuclear fuel. A nuclear power plant such as Fukushima Daiichi contains thousands of tons of nuclear fuel. And this is the reason why just one nuclear meltdown has the capacity to destroy an entire nation. A single nuclear disaster, such as a spent fuel pool fire, can release more radiation than the combined radiation of all the nuclear weapons tests ever conducted.
皆さんこんにちは。京都大学原子炉実験所の小出弘明と申します。今日は福島第一原子力発電所の事故についてお集まりくださっているようでありがとうございます。その事故について私が考えていることをいくつかお聞きいただくことにします。そのうちで私が一番危険だと思っているのはセシウム137と呼ぶ放射性物質が、それを尺度にして測ると広島原爆がまき散らしたセシウム137の168発分をすでに大気中に放出してしまったと日本国政府が国際的な原子力推進組織である IAEA に対して報告しています。 私自身はおそらくそれは過小評価で、それの2倍か3倍、つまり広島原爆がまき散らしたセシウム137の400発あるいは500発分がすでに大気中にまき散らされたと思っています。それと同時に水に溶けた放射性物質が地下に流れていって海に流出するということも起きていて、おそらく大気中に放出された放射性物質とほとんど同量のものがすでに海に流れていると思います。
There's another international agency, the World Health Organization, WHO, and indeed the book charges that the truth has not come out on Chernobyl from the WHO. I mean, forget about the IAEA, but from the WHO because of an agreement between these two agencies. Can you elaborate on that agreement?
They formed an agreement in 1959 that has not been changed, where one will not release a report without the agreement of the other. Now, this is like having Dracula guard the blood bank, because the WHO, who is charged with World Health Organization, is beholden to the IAEA before they can release a report.
And what the IAEA, I mentioned before, it's there to regulate nuclear technology around the world, but it was also set up to
promote it.
And it evidently does not want anything from WHO, which would indicate that nuclear power is not good for one's health.
That's right. And this needs to be ended. This agreement needs to be stopped.
Let me go right to you. Now, you've devoted your life to the impacts of poisons. I mean, that's been your specialty. Mm-hmm. You're a toxicologist. Here you're editing this book. You're going through all this scientific data. This has to be 1 million dead, the Chernobyl accident, the biggest technological disaster in frankly, the history of the world.
It's true.
How did you feel as you looked at the data and you put this book together?
Well, I realized it was far worse than I thought it was. And that not only were people dying of cancer and heart disease, but every single organ in the body, whether it was immunological or lungs or cataracts or skin, everything was adversely affected. But not only people, every single system that was studied, and not all were, but every system that was studied, whether it was humans or fish or trees or birds, bacteria, viruses, wolves, cows, every system was changed. Every single system without exception.
And this is reflected in this
book. It's not just human effects. Many of the birds and animals had similar adverse effects as humans.
Now, most people aren't familiar with, I mean, we all know, I think, at this point that radioactivity and cancer go together, but like heart problems, heart disease, how does that connect?
Well, one of the most fascinating things that I learned when I was rewriting the text of the book and going through all the data was one of the scientists, Bandashevsky, had done a study that showed that the cesium-137 levels in children were the same as he had found in test animals and were causing heart damage. He reported this, and for his work, he was put in prison.
And he was put in prison?
He was put in prison, yes.
And he analyzed, these are animals that were...
Well, he did the original study on animals, and then he was a pathologist, and he was studying the results in children, and he found the same changes in the hearts of children who had died as he'd seen in the animals. And when he reported it, his thanks was he got arrested and put in prison.
на пороховой бочке, которая может в любой момент взорваться совершенно в непредсказуемой ситуации и совершенно не в предсказуемое время. Наука только тогда, когда начинает установление какой-то зависимости между любыми параметрами. Здесь должна быть применена логика.
То есть поиск причин.
Причинно-следственная связь. Вы совершенно верно сказали. Должно быть, в этом может быть известных несколько параметров, но сочетание их и установление зависимости — это уже наука. Было очень важно. Я жил этому до самого своего ареста. Чтобы люди знали об этом. Дело не в том, кто Бандажевский, Бандажевская, Сидоров, Петров скажет об этом. Ведь у нас же дети гибнут.
On June the 18th, Yuri Bandashevsky, author of more than 400 scientific publications and 8 monographs, owner of 7 patents, member of 5 academies, recipient of 5 international awards, was condemned by the military court of the Supreme Court of Belarus to 8 years in a work camp for alleged corruption. 1 year of inquiry could produce no proof against him.
Посмотрите, показания свидетеля Янкелевича, который сказал, что да, я передал Бандажевскому $7000 за поступление брата и сестры к Резуку. Что это не доказательство?
Under the rule of law, such an assertion, which has never been proved, is considered libel. Amnesty International adopted Bandashevsky as a prisoner of conscience. The European Parliament gave him the passport for liberty, demanding that he be allowed to resume his research. The European Union called for a revision of the trial, stained by 8 violations of the Belarusian Criminal Code.
This is the most important thing that Bandashevsky discovered, and he published this quite early on. In fact, I received his first publication. He sent it to me in the West. It was produced on a samizdat printing press and smuggled out of the country. And I've still got this book. It's a little book, and it's called, it has the dynamics of death rates in children who have different levels of cesium-137. And do you know what they did? His colleague Nestorenko actually made an armchair and put contamination monitors into the armchair with sellotape, and he sat children in the armchair and worked out a way of measuring the cesium-137 in those children. In a sort of, it was like an armchair with wheels, and they used to wheel it around to the various villages in the contaminated areas, and they used to sit the children in the armchair and measure the cesium-137 in the children. And what they found quite early on was that they had electrocardiograph modifications as a result of the concentrations of cesium inside them. So they were getting heart conduction problems. So you get this PQR wave. You put an ECG, you got PQR, 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 and you can tell from the heights of the different wave parts in the electrocardiogram whether the heart is functioning properly or not. And of course, in the children with the high levels of ECG problem, here, you find that those children are having heart attacks and they're having cardiac arrhythmias. So they keep falling over. They go white. They don't run about. They're listless. They sit about all the time. They're always sleepy. And of course, because if your heart's not working properly, that's what you do. And you have big brown circles under your eyes because your circulation is not working properly. And then you have a heart attack and die. And these are the results that he found. These are the cesium concentrations in the organism in terms of becquerels per gram versus the number of children without any problems in their heart. So you can see this is the percentage of children. So by the time you get 12 to 26 becquerels of cesium-137 in your body, as measured in this little wheelchair thing I was telling you about, 40% of the children are without ECG modification. That means that 60% have got ECG modification. That means this is electrocardiogram. It means your heart's not working. It means that 60% of the children who've got this level, 12 to 25 becquerels per kilogram, their heart isn't working. Isn't this extraordinary? And do you know what happened to Bandashevsky when he published this and sent it to the West? He was arrested and sent to jail. He went sent to the Gulag. He was in the Gulag for 3 or 4 years, hard labour. That's what he got as his price for saving the children. And it was only because of Amnesty International and all of us anti-nuclear people shouting and screaming in the European Parliament and so on that eventually Lukashenko let him out. And they gave him this special passport, you know, called a European passport. So there we are. That's what's going to happen to the people of Fukushima.
Значит, у тебя 137 бикерелей на килограмм удельной активности. Цифра довольно большая, приличная. Нужно определить, из-за чего это могло получиться. То есть основные источники это могут быть грибы, дичь, ягоды лесные, рыба, да? Вот. Из того, что пищи, ты что-нибудь съешь? Грибы, ягоды. Ну, дома у тебя что-нибудь есть из этих продуктов?
Да.
Мы посмотрим, посмотрим спектр, да? Если там будет цезий какой-то, то ты будешь знать, из-за чего это.
Немножко больше, чем в прошлый раз. Но вот этот вот горбик, это и есть цезий.
А у тебя со здоровьем были проблемы какие-то?
Ну, щитовидка увеличена была.
Ага.
Тебе нравится? Вкусно?
Все выше и выше получается. То есть явно вот в этой чернике уже цезий есть. Уже есть его нельзя. Каждый раз этот цезий ты себе вовнутрь забрасываешь.
Он может вызвать царапину, правильно?
Запросто.
Какие органы он в первую очередь, как вы думаете, может затронуть?
Желудочно-кишечный тракт, сердце, печень, почки, легкие.
То есть вы верите в то, что
And is he worried about anything?
Беспокоены тем, что у вас очень
Да. В грязных регионах там патологии щитовидной железы, там рак, лейкоз и прочие очень опасные болезни, они встречаются чаще, чем в чистых регионах. И на основании этой статистики делается вывод, что именно в этих регионах за счет радиации дети чаще болеют.
Я 7 лет болею.
Тебе сейчас сколько?
Мне уже 14.
7 лет болеешь, да?
4.
Чем болеешь?
Системно-красная лучанка.
А что у тебя болит, расскажи?
У меня болело сердце. Что?
Ты не расстраивайся. Не расстраивайся. Ну, уже все прошло, уже не болит. Ну, Оленька, все, давай глазки уже убери, у тебя глазки красивые, давай убери, уже ты большая девочка, все. Не болели, сейчас уже тебе легче. Ну, расскажи, что еще тебе болит?
She has a serious heart defect. And doctor said it means that they can do something for her. So, but if you can help...
Down. She's been on her own here. So, how old is she? 13, 12.
She has heart defects as well. Doctor in charge asked me to show this girl. You can help.
How long has she been here?
1 week.
How long has she been sick for?
С рождения ты болеешь, да? А как тебя зовут?
Инна.
Инна.
А ты дуй. Дуй. Давай, а я, ладно? Я буду дуть.
He had an atrial septal defect, which is a hole in the right chamber, the upper chambers of the heart between the two. He also had a ventricular septal defect, which is a hole in the bottom, between the bottom two chambers of the heart that was repaired.
Where's he from?
Из Гомеля.
That's in the contaminated region?
Да.
Why do you want to blow the bubbles?
Because it makes them take that big deep breath. Deep breath and reopens their lungs. Keeps their lungs open and healthy.
Does the government give you money since you live in the contaminated region?
Ну, в смысле, раньше платили, а вот сейчас это как бы уже отменили, это считается как уже чистая, наверное, зона. My name is Oksana.
Speak English.
Little bit just. Her name is Victoria. 4 дефекта в сердце.
Where are you from?
Near Minsk.
Near Minsk.
Yes.
Is that in a contaminated region?
Yes.
And without the operation, would she have died?
Yes.
So they saved her life, the American doctors.
Of course. Thank you for American people. I'm very, very, very happy.
Умничка ты моя, держись только, девочка. Вон мы с папой тут заболеем за тебя, только ради Бога. Мои ручки.
Their zone is which zone? Zone number 1?
Да, это такая, считается не сильно загрязненная, а мало загрязненная зона. Нас уже сняли чернобыльские надбавки.
А вы слышали вот это выражение «бытующим в сердце Чернобыля»? И что вы думаете об этом?
Слышал, конечно, об этом. Вполне реально, что это, конечно, тоже влияло на состояние и на, как говорится, радиация на иммунную систему и на генетически влияет на людей, поэтому возможны любые отклонения, и онкологические, и сердечные заболевания.
Есть ли еще дети с сердечными заболеваниями?
Да, много детей. Есть много.
And does he have any alternative? Can he move?
Переехать, бросать свои насиженные места, как говорится, свою родину не особо хотелось бы, там, где родился, вырос, где уже прикипел душой к этому месту. А куда-то приехать на новое место, это, я считаю, это сложно и с работой у нас, если на территории Беларуси, за границей, тем более, это очень сложно куда-то уехать.
This little girl, she's 13 years old, almost 14. Unfortunately, she was seen at another institution in this town and was deemed inoperable there. But fortunately for her, she came over here. All right, Dimitri, let me in there. She has 2 holes in the heart, which, according to the Ukrainians, is the defect that they described as a Chernobyl heart. This is the right ventricle. This is where the hole is. I don't think there's any way on God's green earth to show you this hole.
You can see a hole though?
Uh-huh. I hope so. If I can't, we're in big trouble. Relax some, Michael.
They're putting in the VSD patch, so that'll close the hole between the right ventricle and the left ventricle.
What's it made of?
Gore-Tex. This patch will last her for her entire life.
And the heart just keeps growing?
Yeah, the heart just grows around the patch. The patch doesn't have to stretch or anything like that.
Is that where the patch is?
It's on the inside of the heart.
The patch isn't expensive, is it?
It's very expensive, yeah. Tell her how much one of these costs, Martina. One Gore-Tex.
$300, that please.
So, in a country where average monthly income for the physicians is only $100 or less, $300 patch is pretty expensive. Once we get this hole closed, then we'll let the blood actually go to the lungs where it's supposed to.
Надо, чтобы она жила. Господи, Боже мой, помогите. Всем врачам. И Танечка, держись, доченька моя, родненькая. Пусть она держится. Что за ее переживаем. Ой.
How are you? Let's tell her that she's fine, okay?
Ваша девочка все в порядке.
All right.
Спасибо вам большое.
You're welcome, пожалуйста, пожалуйста. So they're going to take the tube out in a little while, and she'll be able to talk to her.
Когда вам разрешат туда войти, когда
Okay.
она сможет с вами говорить.
And tell her that this diagnosis that she received in the other hospital about not being a candidate for operation was incorrect.
И диагноз, который ей дали в другом госпитале, был неправильным.
Okay?
Ой, спасибо
Okay?
вам большое.
Okay? Okay. You're welcome.
Спасибо вам большое.
Okay? So, any
Спасибо.
questions? Does Mom have any questions for me?
Большое вам спасибо.
Is this Dan? You're welcome very much. Any questions? No questions?
Вопросы какие-то?
Ну, какие вопросы могут быть?
Мы очень рады.
дочки.
Мы очень рады,
Ее
что вы прооперировали. И
Да.
спасли нашу девочку.
Well, tell her that we're very happy to do that.
Они очень счастливы, что они смогли.
Okay?
Спасибо вам
All
большое.
right. Okay.
Спасибо.
Bye.
You just mentioned how the consequences were a lot to the northwest because the winds were blowing towards, of all places, Scandinavia, the Lapps. I mean, people who had nothing to do whatsoever with Chernobyl or nuclear power, they got hit. There was rain and there was fallout and so forth. Speak about those consequences.
A recent study has come out shown that that children born in Scandinavia at the time when the Chernobyl fallout occurred are less likely to graduate from high school. They have intellectual impairment.
How would that? What would be the relationship there between radioactivity and a deterioration of intellectual capability?
Well, while a mother is pregnant, she is eating food, and what happened was that most of the people either did not know or they did not have access to food that was not contaminated. These isotopes are taken into the body while a woman is pregnant. They are transported through her body to the unborn and damage the heart, the lungs, the thyroids, the brains, all of the tissues, the immunological system of these unborn. These children are born unwell, low birth weight. There was a very high fetal death rate as a result of these exposures. This is probably the greatest tragedy that could occur to a culture.
Are all these kids mentally ill?
It's a mixed unit altogether, so you can find that you have children in here that are, that are perfectly normal, but they have physical disabilities, and that's kind of sad. And this to me is the saddest unit of the entire building, really. And like, they live inside these little cots, it's their whole world. The kids will get to be 17 or 18, they're unfortunately sent over to the adult mental asylum, which is a part of it that's also a semi-prison, and it's a dangerous place.
This is one of the new children, yeah. It's a little girl from the number one.
She's lovely.
Yeah. The number one home for abandoned babies. When they're up to 4 years of age, they then, if they're still alive, they end up coming here. And this is their permanent home then.
Do you know when a baby comes in if the baby was affected by Chernobyl?
Nobody can ever say categorically whether a child has been affected by Chernobyl or not. All we can say is that the defects are increasing, the illnesses are increasing, the genetic damage is increasing. Places like this didn't exist really before Chernobyl, so it speaks for itself. in the statistics, but nobody will ever say for sure that this child or that child was definitely affected, but we just know from what we see. This is the #1 home for abandoned babies in Minsk, and this home did not exist before Chernobyl. Look at you, chicken. Look at this little sweetheart. This is a lovely little girl called Dasha. This is Julia, who's 4 years old, and her brain is not within her skull. It's actually a separate entity onto the back of her head. I suppose I'm relieved to see that she's still alive, even though I'm not sure if that's the best thing for her either.
Не любит, когда ее трогаешь. Вот, смотрите, какая гришка. Вот такая вот гришка. О, видите?
How's Eugene? He looks so well, much better than he did when he was younger.
Can she do anything for him?
Ему уже не сделать. Ему уже нельзя. Он консультирован нейрохирургами, все, но операцию уже, увы, нельзя. It's too late. You can't operate.
It's his kidneys inside and that, yeah. But it's affected his legs as well. You can see his legs, there's no mobility there. And he's the most gorgeous baby. We know him for a long time.
Can they do anything, or because
No, they can't. They can't, not now anyway.
Do you know what's going to happen to him?
Nobody knows.
У нас был телевизор, но только он испортился, его забрали. А сейчас у нас его нету, и нам скучно. Вы нам не можете дать, пожалуйста, или телевизор, или магнитофон, или приемник.
Да, ты бы не показал свои руки или ноги, это только вот. А ты так двигать немножко можешь? Чуть-чуть, да? That's the only movement he has.
Is it painful?
А не болит, когда ты двигаешь? Нет. И не болит, если ты садишься?
Нет.
А как ты вот двигаешься? Вот так и передвигаешься, а в школу?
А в школу меня носят.
Кем ты хочешь быть?
Врачом.
So you'd like to be a doctor.
Why?
А почему? Почему ты такую профессию выбрал?
Чтобы лечить детей.
Вот привезли крем, который тогда смотрели, и врачи посоветовали Саше наложить вот этот крем. Так, может, можно попросить санитарку? Медсестра, да?
Саша, вот так ручку переверни. Переверни ручку, вот так. Не трогай, Катя, не трогай. Катя, не трогай. Тише, тише, тише. Щипит. Щипит ножку.
Даже дело в том, что он все-таки с детьми общается.
Чего? Окей. А вот можно было бы как-то соотнести с тем, что и Чернобыль внес свой вклад в то, что мы теперь видим?
Я думаю, что да, все-таки уже 19 лет, как я здесь работаю. Я могу с твердой уверенностью сказать, что раньше у нас были дети более смышленые. Сейчас они как физически более тяжелые, так и умственно. То есть они родились с какими-то сложными отклонениями, и от них просто уже отказались.
Говорит, видно, что вы уже даже на слезы. Это всегда так вызывает?
Я вообще не могу. У меня тоже двое детей. Но, слава богу, здоровая.
Chief among them is cesium-137, which has taken on special significance because it's proven to be the most abundant of the long-lived radionuclides that has remained in the environment following the nuclear disasters of Chernobyl and Fukushima. It has a 30-year radioactive half-life, which is why it persists in the environment. Scientists now believe that it will be 180 to 320 years before the cesium-137 around the destroyed Chernobyl reactor actually disappears from the environment. Cesium is water-soluble and quickly makes its way into soils and waters. It's the same atomic family as potassium, and it mimics it, acting as a macronutrient. It quickly becomes ubiquitous in contaminated ecosystems. It is distributed by the catastrophic accidents of nuclear power plants because large quantities of volatile radioactive cesium build up inside the fuel rods of nuclear reactors. Thus, any accident at a nuclear reactor that causes the fuel rods to rupture, melt, or burn will cause the release of radioactive cesium gas. Long-lived radionuclides, such as cesium-137, are something new to us as a species. They did not exist on Earth in any appreciable quantities during the entire evolution of complex life. Although they are invisible to our senses, they are millions of times more poisonous than most of the common poisons we are familiar with. They cause cancer, leukemia, genetic mutations, birth defects, malformations, and abortions at concentrations almost below human recognition and comprehension. They are lethal at the atomic or molecular level. They emit radiation, invisible forms of matter and energy that we might compare to fire, because radiation burns and destroys human tissue. But unlike the fire of fossil fuels, the nuclear fire that issues forth from radioactive elements cannot be extinguished. It is not a fire that can be scattered or suffocated, because it burns at the atomic level. It comes from the disintegration of single atoms. Thus, radioactivity is a term which indicates how many radioactive atoms are disintegrating in a time period. We measure the intensity of radioactivity by the rate of disintegrations and the energy they produce. 1 becquerel is equal to 1 atomic disintegration per second. 1 curie is defined as that amount of any radioactive material that will decay at a rate of 37 billion disintegrations per second. So 1 curie equals 37 billion becquerels. Sometimes these man-made radionuclides are compared to naturally occurring radionuclides, such as potassium-40, which is always found in bananas and other fruits.
Radiation is all around us, it's even inside us all the time, and it's perfectly natural and safe. To show you, we got this Geiger counter similar to the ones they're using in Japan. And as you can see, right here in the centre of Perth, there's always background radiation. Have a look at this. We're at a fruit shop and we're going to put the Geiger counter on some bananas. Now, they contain potassium, which we need to live, but is also radioactive. And you can see the count there is going up.
However, this is a false comparison, since naturally occurring radioactive elements are very weakly radioactive. In the charts from the labs that are in green up there, the radioactivity is described as a specific activity. Note that potassium-40 has a specific activity of 71 10-millionths of a curie per gram. Compare that to the 88 curies per gram for cesium-137. It's like comparing a stick of dynamite to an atomic bomb. Highly radioactive fission products such as cesium-137 and strontium-90 emit 10 to 20 million times more radiation per unit volume than does potassium-40. So which one of these would you rather have in your bananas? It is in fact the amount of cesium-137 deposited per square kilometer of land that defines the degree to which an area is classified as being too radioactive to work or live. One may get an idea of the extreme toxicity of cesium-137 by considering how little of it is required to make a large area of land uninhabitable. The lands that were grossly contaminated by the destruction of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant are classified by the number of curies of radiation per square kilometer. Were 3,840 square miles of land contaminated with 15 to 40 curies of radiation per square kilometer. These lands are considered strict radiation dose control zones. The 1,100 square mile uninhabitable exclusion zone that surrounds a destroyed Chernobyl reactor has greater than 40 curies of radioactivity per square kilometer. For those more familiar with square miles, that would be 104 curies per square mile. Consider again that 1 gram of cesium-137 has 88 curies of radioactivity. Less than 2 grams of cesium-137, a piece smaller than an American dime, if made into microparticles and evenly distributed as a radioactive gas over an area of 1 square mile, will turn that square mile into an uninhabitable radioactive exclusion zone. Central Park in New York City can be made uninhabitable by 2 grams of microparticles of cesium-137. Remember, these nuclear poisons are lethal at the atomic level. There are as many atoms in 1 gram of cesium-137 as there are grains of sand in all the beaches of the world. That's 10 to 21 atoms, 10 to the 21st power. 1,480 trillion of them, which is 10 to the 12th power, are disintegrating every second, releasing invisible nuclear energy. So this works out to about 1.5 million disintegrations per square meter. You can see how this works then. I included an extra slide just to note the immense inventories of cesium-137, 150 million curies that are located in the nearby spent fuel pool at Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant, which is about 40 miles from here by road, and less than that as the radioactive cloud flies. Many of the 104 U.S. commercial nuclear reactors and power plants have more than 100 million curies of cesium-137 in their spent fuel pools. This is many times more than the spent pools at Fukushima.
But in terms of the full cost of nuclear power, it probably comes out, most estimates suggest, somewhere around 4 pence per kilowatt hour of electricity generated, which is more expensive than fossil fuel, probably comparable, slightly more expensive than large-scale wind, but cheaper than some other renewable technologies. It comes sort of about 2/3 of the way up the scale as far as we can see. It's not cheap, it's not wildly expensive either, but it is, of course, a low-carbon source of electricity.
The cost is astronomical. To fix this is going to be something on the order of $500 billion. All of the money that Japan saved on oil over the 40 years that they've had nuclear plants just got thrown away in the $500 billion recovery effort.
The estimate from the Belarusian government is that it will cost them 235 billion to actually cope with the problem. And of course, I mean, you know, what country could cope with the scale of that? I mean, what country's medical system could cope with the scale of the illnesses, could cope with the scale of the problems as they were then, as they have been over the last 22 years, and as they will be in the future? I mean, God help Belarus. That's all I can say. I mean, unless the international community really recognises the scale of this problem and stops the denial and starts to recognise the truth, because otherwise we will learn nothing from what happened in 1986. And you know, if it's with my last breath, I will keep on telling the story and telling the story in order that we may learn from this, and that in a sense that we have the courage and the willingness to stand up in the name of the children of future generations to say, not in their name. We owe them that. We're about to witness something very shocking, something very disturbing this morning, something that none of us would ever see in countries like Ireland or in any part of the civilized world, to be honest. And this is really, I suppose, the fallout of the economic impact of Chernobyl on little Belarus, who is suffering so greatly. And this is something that I am not looking forward to this morning. I'm actually very, very disturbed by what we have to witness.
Today we will have some operations, tonsillectomy. It's happened every day, and in this operating room. And sometimes our surgeons have maybe 7 or 10 operations in one day.
Не надо бегать. У нас стульчик шатается, ты упадешь. Не надо, не плачь, мы тебя потом отведем в палату. Не плачь. Переодевается. Не плачь. Дай мне ручку. Не плачь.
Я буду ничего трогать. Почему?
У нас стульчик шатается, понимаешь, ты можешь упасть. Не надо плакать, мы тебя отвяжем.
All operations are made without special anesthesia because our conditions in this operating room don't allow us to use anesthesia.
Зачем закрывать глаза?
Свет яркий у нас, свет яркий. Ну, видишь, какой зайчик.
Тихо, тихо, все, молодец, молодец.
Always it's big panic for children, and certainly it's big panic for doctors and nurses as well.
Тихо, 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 тихо.
Every operation is big trouble, with bleeding, with crying, and it's big stress for everybody who are in this operation room. Always when I see this operation, my heart is broken to see how child is suffered from this operation.
Сейчас полежите, не разговаривай, не надо разговаривать.
But unfortunately, it's our life, it's our conditions, and we have to do this.
Words fail to describe what we've witnessed here in this operating theatre this morning. You want to be stoned not to have been moved by what we've just witnessed. I found this experience absolutely traumatic, distressing beyond description. That last little boy was saying, "Why are you doing this to me? Please don't cover my eyes." And then he was describing how terribly painful it was. I mean, I really had a real sort of choking sense, and his fear was very, very obvious throughout the procedure, no matter how swift it was. It was something that no child should ever have to go through. I really, really felt his pain today, and I just feel, you know, we've got to intervene in some way to make sure that this procedure doesn't have to continue in the future.
Идем, 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 тихо, тихо. Все, не плачь.
Natasha Tatarintsev is a 33-year-old lone parent. Her son Sasha is 12. She has a tumour on her spine and cannot walk. Sasha has severe brain damage. He had a tonsils operation when he was a year old. It was carried out without anaesthetic and went terribly wrong.
Уверена, что мой ребенок захлебнулся кровью, что у него было кровотечение, что поэтому остановилось сердце, было задето что-то и было кровотечение, потому что была неоднократно большая рвота кровью.
I'm shocked when I see the condition of Sasha here, and I just keep on, you know, in my memory looking back to the operation procedures that we saw for exactly the same operation yesterday, and which was quite barbaric, the way the tonsils are just literally torn out of the body, and children are gurgling on their own blood, and listening to, you know, his mama here saying how he gurgled on his blood, and she's convinced that some sort of infection happened during that. What should have been just a normal routine procedure has had just this extraordinarily terrible outcome, which has left Sasha completely disabled.
Мне надо досмотреть ребенка, мне надо, пока он живет, чтобы я была с ним. Я не могу сама рассказать, что я для него делаю. Это надо быть со мной, видеть, тогда человек поймет, что я ему нужна, не какой-то интернат.
it's just an overwhelming situation. I mean, the mother is here by herself with very little state support. She also has a tumour on her spine. She doesn't know her own prognosis, her own outcome. I'm sure the questions that run through her mind are who's going to look after Sasha if something happens to her. She's doing her best to avoid putting him into a state institution or an orphanage because she loves her son. I mean, this mother, obviously, you can see radiating out from her the love, the care, the responsibility that she feels for Sasha.
Много людей. Несмотря на то, что я с ребенком стали инвалидами, я хочу, чтобы мой ребенок получил достаточно внимания, достаточно ухода и, самое главное, любви от меня, от мамы. Ну и чтобы его жизнь не была тяжелой, чтобы он не испытывал боли, которые он совершенно не заслужил в этой жизни. Ну совершенно, ни в чем не виноватое дитё. И я хочу, люблю и обязана смотреть своего ребенка. И очень хочу с ним жить дома. То, что нам бывает очень тяжело, потому что мы одиноки. Вот. Но у меня огромное желание помочь своему ребенку, ну, столько, сколько мы будем жить.
She gave birth to what was, a healthy boy, and now she's left with a boy in this condition. It just is shocking to the core. We're making him as comfortable as we can for as long as we possibly can. And Sasha is just one of many children, but in a sense, I suppose he is the witness on this day of these children that need our help.
The events at Fukushima reinforce that any nuclear accident with public health and safety or environmental consequences of that magnitude is inherently unacceptable. While we focused on the radiological consequences of this event, I believe we cannot ignore the large social and economic consequences such an event poses to any country with a nuclear facility that deals with such a crisis. In Japan, more than 90,000 people remain displaced from their homes and land, with some having little prospect for a return to their previous lifestyle in the foreseeable future. While not easy to characterize, these are significant hardships on these people, and they are inherently unacceptable. So as we look to the future, and we look in a proactive way, we ultimately will have to address the issue of how we deal with nuclear events that lead to significant land contamination and displacement, perhaps permanently, of people from their homes and their livelihoods and their communities.
What you just heard was the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's chairman, Gregory Yasko, saying that the NRC doesn't take into account mass evacuations and people not getting back on their land for centuries when it does a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not a nuclear plant should be licensed. I'm Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds, and today I'm at the Regulatory Information Conference put on by the NRC in Washington, D.C. A couple weeks ago, though, I was in Tokyo. And when I was in Tokyo, I took some samples. Now, I didn't look for the highest radiation spot. I just went around with 5 plastic bags, and when I found an area, I just scooped up some dirt and put it in the bag. One of those samples was from a crack in the sidewalk. Another one of those samples was from a children's playground that had been previously decontaminated. Another sample had come from some moss on the side of the road. Another sample came from the roof of an office building that I was at. And the last sample was right across the street from the main judicial center in downtown Tokyo. Well, I brought those samples back, declared them through customs, and sent them to the lab. And the lab determined that all of them would be qualified as radioactive waste here in the United States and would have to be shipped to Texas to be disposed of. Now think about the ramifications for the nation's capital, whether it's Tokyo or the United States. How would you like it if you went to pick your flowers and were kneeling in radioactive waste? That's what's happening in Tokyo now. And I think that's the point that Chairman Yasko was trying to make. When the Nuclear Regulatory Commission does its cost-benefit analyses now, it doesn't take into account the cost to society if you have to evacuate for generations, or if you have to move 100,000 people, perhaps forever. There's 100 miles between us and about a dozen nuclear power plants here in Washington, D.C. Fukushima was almost 200 miles away from Tokyo. And yet Tokyo soil, in some places, the ones I just happened to find, would qualify as radioactive waste here in the States. How would we feel if our nation's capital were contaminated to that degree?
Now, earlier I spoke via Skype with an expert on nuclear radiation. Janet Sherman is a physician and a former member of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. I began by asking her why this leakage was happening at Fukushima.
You're not going to like my answer, but water runs downhill. And of course, the ocean is lower than the plant. And trying to control the plant, the owners have been pouring tons and tons and tons of water to keep the plant under control so that there's not a nuclear reaction, and to cool the spent fuel rods.
But as you say, if they're pouring these tons and tons of water into the plant, did they not take precautions to stop it flowing into the sea?
Well, they've tried. They built a barrier. They dug down a barrier. And of course, if you've ever had a leak in your home, you know that it's very hard to stop water from running around any barrier. The latest I've heard is that TEPCO, the owner of the Fukushima plant, wants to freeze the barrier. And I have no idea how this could possibly be done.
So they're actually going to build a wall of frozen water. Is that what they do?
Well, this is the latest thing I've heard that's been proposed. But I can't imagine how it could work, because you have to remember that the water they're pouring onto the plant and onto the spent fuel rods heats up, because that's why they're pouring the water on, because it's hot and they need to keep it cooled. So how are you going to, if you drop an ice cube into your warm tea, it's going to melt. And if you pour this hot water over a frozen barrier, I think it's going to melt.
Right, and as I understand it, one of the longer-term plans is to repair the walls and the floor of the reactor units themselves, but they've been unable to do that so far. What is preventing them from repairing that?
Well, I'm sure the high radiation levels. You cannot send workers in there for more than a couple of minutes, otherwise they're going to get high doses of radiation. We have to remember that even the Chernobyl plant, which that plant melted down, it's like over 25 years ago, and that plant is still leaking, but not like Fukushima.
Right, from what we know about what is going on at the plant right now, is this going to get worse?
I hate to say this, but yes, I think it will. And my concern is the enormous amount of radioactive material flowing with the water into the Pacific Ocean. And we know that the ocean flows northward along Alaska and then down the coast of Canada and the United States. And I think it probably will imperil the entire Pacific Ocean and the sea life that's in it.
So very quickly, what you're saying here is that this water can actually reach other shores, can reach other countries as well.
Oh, absolutely. We already know that.
Right, the radioactive content in this water, does that dissipate or does it just stay in the water all the time?
Well, both cesium and strontium have a half-life of about 30 years. It takes 10 half-lives for each of these isotopes to decay down to nothing. We contaminate the plankton, and that's eaten by, shrimp and oysters and fish and mammals. And as most of these move up the food chain, they get concentrated
particularly strontium-90, gets concentrated in the bones.
Janet Sherman, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
The main argument now, the main green argument for nuclear power is the climate one, that this is basically a zero carbon source of baseload electricity, which is what you need to run cities and so on. And the world's now half cities and is headed toward 80% urban people. So we're going to want a lot of that kind of electricity, and it either comes from coal or from nuclear. And the coal waste, which is hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, is tremendously deleterious in terms of climate, plus all the other stuff that comes out of there, mercury and so on. Whereas the waste from nuclear is very limited in size and in scale. It's heavy, but you put it in these dry cask storage containers out back of the parking lot at the reactor sites, and there's not very much of it. It doesn't add up very quickly. You're getting a lot of juice out of it. And then it's relatively easy to either put in the ground. I think the best site for it is in New Mexico at what's called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant that's already been dealing with nuclear waste for 10 years. Or leave it where it is for 50, 100 years while we think about whether we want to either reprocess it the way the French do, or completely burn it in the fourth generation faster reactors that are very comfortable treating that waste as fuel.
When I was in the Energy Department, we looked at a spent fuel pool problem at the Hanford site, and it had been ignored for decades. And at the closeout briefing, we asked, well, what would happen if there was an earthquake and the water drained and there was a hem and a haw and hem and a haw? And finally, some old-timer basically said, well, there would be a fire that would make Chernobyl look like a pimple on a pumpkin. Irradiated fuel. This is what a spent fuel element looks like. It's extremely radioactive, as some of you all know. Being anywhere near this, you'll receive a lethal dose. These materials are radiotoxic. We've heard a lot of explanation about what that means. But I think there is official recognition by the United States government itself through the Government Accountability Office, who considers spent nuclear fuel to be considered one of the most hazardous substances on the earth. Since the early 1980s, the U.S. Regulatory Commission, with the expectation that the United States would open a permanent repository for the permanent disposal of spent fuel and defense high-level radioactive waste, basically approved high-density storage. These pools are now storing 4 to 5 times more spent fuel than what they were originally designed to hold. The pools were originally intended to be temporary storage facilities for a period of 5 years, and therefore they did not impose or require them to have what are called nuclear safety-rated defense in-depth requirements. These pools do not have secondary containments. Some of these pools have buildings with tin roofs. As I said, some of these pool structures you would find the kind of structure you would expect to find at a Costco, a Walmart, or a Ford dealership. They do not require them to have redundant power. They do not require them to have separate independent water makeup capability. And only after the Fukushima accident did the Nuclear Regulatory Commission get around to requiring the reactor operators for the first time to have instrumentation in their control rooms to tell them water levels, water chemistry, and water temperature of the pools. Before that, people had to go and look in the room. And there were there was at least one occasion when they didn't do that for a while and discovered that the water level dropped dramatically, and there have been some problems. This is a comparison of the amount of spent fuel that with the 4 damaged reactors with reactors of the same design, roughly the same design in the United States. You see, and this is by the number of assemblies, you'll see that the pools in the United States have much more spent fuel in them than those in Japan. And that's because they become indefinite storage modes for the nuclear industry because it saves money.
I think the U.S. has done more harm to itself by worrying about terrorism than the terrorists ever did. And so, we bend everything to think in terms of, oh my gosh, what would a terrible terrorist do with this? And, it's been quite a long time now since there's been that kind of attack. It would take an exceptionally stupid terrorist to try to do something harmful with what goes on with nuclear power. One, the sites are, isolated, incredibly well guarded. The stuff of the way it's transported is very, very safe, and they've run, you can see images, videos of trains running into the containers and no bad thing happening and so on. And one environmentalist said to me, well, you could you could get a shaped charge and blow a hole in that container and get at that spent fuel. And you have to say, okay, and then what? No bad thing has happened yet. It's just there with a hole in it. You want to go deal with it, it's too hot, it'll hurt you. And you're off in the bush somewhere. It's just, it's science fiction to try to imagine tricky ways that terrorists might do bad things with nuclear as it's used in nuclear power.
It's 1972, and for moments, all attention is on Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and a hijacked airplane's trip through the sky that lasted nearly 30 hours.
Two of the hijackers, Henry Jackson and Lewis Moore, are from Detroit.
And then suddenly the door of the cockpit burst open, and in came a flight attendant, and this black guy had his arm around her neck and had a gun up to her head, and he said, we're taking over the airplane.
Moore and two others hijacked the plane shortly after takeoff over Alabama. They demanded cash, $10 million from the Motor City to keep the roughly 36 passengers on board safe.
And if they didn't have the money, we were going to crash the airplane into the nuclear reactor at Knoxville.
Into the high-flux isotope reactor, and I thought, this has got to be a joke. This is too extreme. This sounds like a TV drama.
With the DC-9 flying above Oak Ridge, the then Atomic Energy Commission facility was scurrying, working to get safety measures ready.
Not much we can do to prevent it. They've got the guns, we don't, and there's at least 3 of them, maybe more, we don't know.
As Oak Ridge kept an eye on the sky, many feared the worst.
There were something like 10,000 calls to Oak Ridge, not just to the public information people, 10,000 calls from the public that came in that day.
When we published a paper basically raising the concern about the vulnerabilities of spent fuel pools, particularly to acts of terror and other events like earthquakes. And what we did is we took the literature of the last 25, 30 years of nuclear spent fuel pool safety and took it to its logical extreme. And this is what happened is that, of course, the nuclear industry, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was not happy with us and issued quite a few statements and papers, et cetera, in rebuttal. And this prompted the U.S. Congress to ask the National Academy of Sciences to sort this out. The National Academy came back a year later, and this is what they had to say. They basically agreed with us. They basically pointed out that these pools are particularly vulnerable to terrorist attacks, and that these fires could be quite significant.
皆さんこんにちは。私は2011年福島原発事故当時日本の総理を務めていました菅直人でございます。今回ヘレン・カルディコとファンデーション主催の皆さんのシンポジウムにお招きをいただきましたが、直接出席することが叶いませんでしたので、このビデオで当時のことを含めてメッセージとしてお伝えしたい、このように思っております。3月11日当日にすでに1号機は夜には地震発生後8時間程度後にはメルトダウンし、メルトスルーをして格納容器の底に溶けた核燃料が まった状態になりました。また翌日にはその1号炉が水素爆発を起こしました。こういう形で1号炉、2号炉、3号炉が水素爆発、さらにはメルトダウン、4号炉においても水素爆発が発生したわけであります。この福島第一原発には6基の原発と使用済み燃料を入れた7個の使用済み燃料プールがありました。また第1サイトから12キロ程度離れたところに第2サイトがありまして、そちらには原発が4基、使用済み燃料プールが同じく4個存在しておりました。一時期これらの原発、さらには使用済み燃料プールがコントロール不能という状態になりかけたことがあります。特に3月15日午前3時ごろ、東電が関係者を撤退させたい、避難させたいという申し出が経産大臣を通して私にありました。もし東電関係者が撤退をすれば、それらの原子炉を東電関係者に代わってコントロールするということはほとんど不可能になっていたでしょう。私は大変な危険が伴う作業であることは十分理解をしておりましたけれども、ここは命の危険があっても何としてもとどまって原発の事故対応に当たってほしい、そういうことを強く東電関係者にも申し上げ、とどまっていただきました。そして3月16日から自衛隊による放水の空からの使用済み燃料プールに対する放水の準備、17日にはその1回目の水の投下、こういう形で原発事故に対して対応を進めてまいりました。その中で最悪のシナリオというものを私自身、さらには専門家にも検討してもらいました。先ほど申し上げたように福島第一第二原発を合わせると10の原発と11の使用済み燃料プールがあります。これらがすべてコントロール不能になってそれらがメルトダウンし、そして放射性物質を大気中や海水中に放出したときにどれだけの量の放射性物質が外に出ていくのか。チェルノブイリの事故はこれまでの事故では最も大きかったわけですが、チェルノブイリ事故は1基の原発事故でありました。それに比べて10基の原発がさらには使用済み燃料プールがコントロール不能になったときには極めて広範囲な地域からの避難が必要になる、このように私自身考えておりました。我が国の原子力委員長であった専門家の近藤委員長から最悪の場合は半径250キロ圏において避難が必要になる。この250キロ圏の中には東京を含む首都圏も含まれておりまして、その中に住んでいる我が国の国民は約5000万人、人口の半分近くに達します。もしこの地域から5000万人の人々が家を捨て、あるいは職場を離れ、学校を離れ、あるいは入院している人たちは病院を離れて避難しなければならない、そういう状態になっていれば、その避難の過程でも多くの犠牲者が出たでありましょうし、その後の日本は国としての機能を 長期間にわたって十分果たせない、まさにそういう極めて重大な最悪のシナリオが紙一重の状態にあったわけであります。また本来原発事故の対応の中心になるべき官僚組織、当時は経産省の中にある原子力安全保安院がその役目を担っておりました。しかしこの原子力安全保安院のトップは原子力の専門家ではありませんでした。つまりは法律を作る、あるいは経済的な政策判断をすることの専門家ではありましたけれども、事故に対して備えた人員配置は全くできておりませんでした。そういったハード面ソフト面における備えのなさが今回の事故をより大きな事故にしてしまったと、このように見ているところであります。私はこのような原発事故を体験した上で、これからの我が国、あるいは世界のエネルギー政策の中で原子力発電所とどう向き合うべきか考えました。そして私の出した結論は、最も安全な原子力発電所というのは原子力発電所を持たないこと、つまりは原発ゼロを実現することこそ最も安全な原子力政策、あるいはエネルギー政策だと、このように確信をいたしました。それは言うまでもありません。国土の半分近く、人口の半分近くが避難を余儀なくされるような大きなリスクを防ぐ、そうしたことを考えると、とても技術的に解決できる問題ではないからであります。さらにもっと本質的に言えば、核を人類が操作をして生み出したものの中に原子力爆弾、いわゆる核兵器と原子力発電所があるわけですけれども、このいずれも人間の存在と共存をすることが極めて難しい技術であり存在であると、このように確信したからであります。そしてこれからのエネルギー政策を考えるときに、我々地球上に住む人類、あるいは全ての生物は約45億年の間、太陽と共存をしてまいりました。そしてその太陽が地球上におけるほとんどのエネルギーをこれまで供給してくれていました。私はこれからの地球、そして日本のエネルギー政策は、再生可能な自然エネルギーを拡大して、最終的には原発も使わない、さらには化石燃料も必要としない、風力や太陽やバイオマス、そういった再生可能な自然エネルギーで全てのエネルギーを、必要なエネルギーを実現する、これが目指すべき方向だと、このように考えております。我が国において、事故発生の後、フィードインタリフ、固定価格買取制度を導入して、現在、再生可能エネルギーが、特に太陽光、風力が爆発的に普及が始まっております。また一方で、原子力発電所の問題は事故だけが怖いわけではありません。原発を稼働させれば必ず使用済み核燃料、いわゆる核廃棄物が生まれます。この処理はまだ安全な処理方法は世界で定まっておりません。特に我が国のように地震の最も世界で多い地域において安全に長期間核廃棄物を保管することはほとんど不可能であります。さらには原子力が最も安いエネルギー源だとされてきたこの考え方が根本から覆りつつあります。 もちろんシェールガスといった新たなエネルギー源もありますけれども、もともと再処理あるいは廃棄物、そういうものの処理を考えると原発は決して安いエネルギーではないということが誰の目にも明らかになってまいりました。世界においても私は経済ベースで成り立つ原発は今後も存在できない、存在しないだろうと、このように予測いたしております。まだ我が国では原発は安いんだ、原発がないと日本経済が順調に進まないんだと、このように考えている専門家やあるいは政治家もまだまだおりますけれども、しかし、そうした考え方が間違っているということがこれからよりはっきりとしてくると、このように考えております。そういった意味でこの原子力発電というものはあくまで過渡的な一時的なエネルギーとしてこの地球上に存在した。しかしもう次の世紀には存在をしていない、またそうなるべき技術だと、このように考えているところであります。
Let me introduce to you Mr. Elon Musk. All right, thanks everyone for coming. So what we want to show you tonight is essentially the answer to the three major problems that are holding back electric vehicles, or at least that people think are holding back electric vehicles. One is this question of being able to drive long distances conveniently. And with a gasoline car, you can drive, in theory, anywhere you want with high convenience. Well, how do you do that with an electric car? And that's what the supercharger is going to enable. Then another question is, what do we do about the fact that when electricity is generated, it is generated at a power plant? And so what about this idea that the emissions are just pushed to the power plant? And we're going to show you how we address that. And then the third is, well, what about the cost of electric vehicles? How do you compare the cost of electric vehicles with the cost of gasoline vehicles? The answer to that is what we're going to show you here with the Tesla supercharger. So we're going to have these at highway rest stops all around the country and around the world. And that's combined with the solar power deck that you see there. So that provides the solar power that goes to the supercharger and then to the cars. And then because we have the solar power systems that are providing the energy, and we're sizing the solar power systems with SolarCity, to generate more power than the cars use over the course of a year. So the solar powered system will actually put more power back into the grid than the cars use during driving. This is a very important thing because it goes to the heart of the argument that people will use to say, oh, well, this doesn't really address the CO2 problem because what about the power plant? This is putting more energy back in the grid than the cars use. Okay. And in creating this, the supercharger and the solar panels and all that, working closely with SolarCity and using the existing charger technology that we have in the Model S, running in parallel, we're able to use the economies of scale of the Model S and do the whole thing very inexpensively, which is also very, very important because it's going to enable us to offer this to Model S customers for free. You'll be able to travel for free forever on pure sunlight. And the supercharger, this is not something that's going to be deployed at some distant point in the future. This is video from today showing 4 of the supercharger locations in use. So we actually have 6 superchargers installed already. There's 4 of them, Barstow, Folsom, Tejon, and Harris. And so it's actually already deployed so that you can drive almost anywhere in California right now. This is not, like I said, this is not some figment of imagination that maybe it'll happen some point in the future. These are installed. We built these up in secret, and we're unveiling it for the first time tonight. So by the end of this year, in a few months, we'll actually have a bunch more installed in California and extending to Nevada and Oregon. And going beyond that, within 2 years, this is not an exaggeration, within 2 years, we will cover almost the entire United States with superchargers. You'll be able to travel practically anywhere. And then 4 or 5 year time frame, we expect to cover the entire United States without exception and the lower part of Canada. So, yeah.
In the history of spaceflight, only 4 entities have launched a space capsule into orbit and successfully brought it back to the Earth: the United States, Russia, China, and Elon Musk. Mr. Musk is a wealthy internet entrepreneur who has vowed to revolutionize space exploration by bringing down the astronomical costs. And that can't happen fast enough for NASA, which retired the shuttle last summer and now has to pay its old rival Russia to fly American astronauts into space. Musk is one of the contenders vying for a NASA contract to build America's next manned spacecraft, a contest he believes he has the right stuff to win.
Let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I was born in South Africa, lived there until I was 17, and then moved by myself. Should I give you the whole story? Or?
Yeah, I'd love to hear
the
very beginning.
Sure. So I was born in Pretoria, South Africa. Lived in Johannesburg and Durban as well. Was able to travel to a few countries growing up within Africa and around the world. Went to the US when I was, I don't know, 10-ish or something like that. And I read a lot of comics and books and stuff, and it always seems like, and stuff and things on technology, and it always seemed like when there's cool technology or things happening, it was kind of in the United States. So my goal as a kid was to try to get to America, basically.
What were your favorite comics?
Well, I read every comic in the store. And I like obviously the Batman, Superman stuff. I mean the Green Lantern, Iron Man. Gotta not say Iron Man first because then people will think, But I did think that was a pretty cool one. But I read everything like Doctor Strange. Just if there was a comic on the rack, I read it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And when did you decide to get into computers and technology? Did you start coding, or is it just a lot of noise, a lot of construction going on?
Can you still hear? Okay.
All right. We're good. So did you start coding?
Yeah. So when I was about 10 years old, I went into a store in South Africa and saw a Commodore VIC-20. I guess maybe I was 9 years old. I don't know, somewhere at that time. And I thought this was like the most awesome thing I'd ever seen. And you could write computer programs and make games. And I played Atari and other things for for other games, consoles, when I was like maybe 6 or 7. So the idea of being able to like create games I thought was really exciting. And so that was my first computer, is a Commodore VIC-20. I think it had like 8K of memory.
And then what led you into entrepreneurship? Was it something that you always knew that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and start something on your own, or did you just stumble into it?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I actually wasn't sure what I wanted to do growing up. I think at one point I thought, well, like inventing stuff or creating things would be a cool thing to do. But I wasn't really sure if that meant starting a company or whether that meant working for a company that made cool stuff. In fact, when I first came out to Silicon Valley, it was to do grad studies at Stanford in applied physics and material science. And then I saw, this was in '95, I kind of thought the internet would be something that would change the world in a major way. And I wanted to be part of it. And actually what I first tried to do was I tried to get a job at Netscape. So I wouldn't actually try to start a company, I tried to get a job at Netscape. And then
that didn't work out?
No, I didn't get any reply. So I had a physics and economics degree, or physics and business degree from Wharton, and I was doing grad studies in applied physics and material science, and I guess that, I didn't have a computer science degree or several years working at a software company. So for whatever reason, I didn't get a reply from Netscape, and I actually tried hanging out in the lobby, but I was too shy to talk to anyone, so I was just like standing in the lobby, and then I
just walked in. Did you have your resume with you, or was it?
Yeah, actually, it was pretty embarrassing. I was just sort of standing there, trying to see if there's someone I could talk to, and then I just couldn't. I was too scared to talk to anyone, so then I left.
Amazing. So then you went on to do what from that point?
So then I was just writing software that summer, and it got to the start of the quarter for Stanford, and I had to make a decision, so I decided to go on deferment. So I figure if I start a company and it doesn't work, then I can always go back to grad school. Sure. It's just, so I talked to the chairman of the department, and he let me go on deferment. And I said I'll probably be back in 6 months. And he said he's probably never going to hear from me again, and he was correct. I've never spoken to him since.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And launch of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket as NASA turns to the private sector to resupply the International Space Station.
A future where we're a spacefaring civilization is a far more exciting and inspiring future than one where we are not.
Capture is confirmed.
Houston Station, looks like we got us a dragon by the tail.
Our long-term goal is to be able to develop the technology to transport millions of people to Mars, which will preserve the future of humanity in the event of a calamity on Earth. I absolutely think we want to have a future where humanity is out there exploring the stars and where we have human civilization on multiple planets.
So I want to explain sort of why do I think space is really important, and what about space, and because I believe in sort of building things up from a rational sort of framework of logic, and so you start with sort of, well, how do you decide that anything is important? And I think the lens of history is a helpful guide here, in that things that may seem important in the moment, but actually aren't that important in the grand scheme. Over time, if you look at things over a broad span of time, the things that are less important kind of fall away. And if you look at things from the broadest possible span of time as it relates to life itself, and the evolution of life has been, primitive life, I think, started around 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. And
what are the important steps in the evolution of life? And obviously there was the advent of single-celled life, there was differentiation to plants and animals, there was life going from the oceans to land, there was mammals, consciousness, and I would argue also on that scale should fit life becoming multiplanetary. And in fact, I think consciousness, it's the next step actually, because you really kind of need consciousness to design vehicles that can transport life over hundreds of millions of miles of irradiated space to an environment that they did not evolve to exist in. It would be very convenient, of course, if there was another planet just like Earth nearby. But that's unlikely, and as it turns out, not the case. So I think you couldn't really. There's no way for life to sort of just by dint of natural selection just sort of get over to Mars and survive. So you need consciousness. You got to design. So I think it is the next natural step. So I think if one could make a reasonable argument that something is important enough to fit on the scale of evolution, then it's important and maybe worth a little bit of our resources. And one can also think of it from the standpoint of life insurance. There's some chance, either as a result of something humanity does, or as a result of something natural like a giant asteroid hitting us or something, that civilization, life as we know it, could be destroyed. There's clear evidence for life being destroyed multiple times in the fossil record. So we don't need to guess that this is something that can occur. It has occurred. The Permian extinction being a particularly interesting one, because I think that destroyed somewhere between 90 and 95% of all species on Earth, which doesn't tell the full story because most of the remaining species were fungi. So unless you're a mushroom, you're out of luck. So if we think it's worth buying life insurance on an individual level, well, perhaps it's worth spending something on life insurance for life as we know it, and arguably that expenditure should be greater than zero. So then we can just get to the question of what is an appropriate expenditure for life insurance, I think probably if it's something like 0.25% of the GDP, that would be okay. I think most people would say, okay, that's not too bad. But you don't want it. You want it to be some sort of number that is much less than we spend on healthcare, but maybe more than we spend on lipstick. And I think it's also one of the most inspiring and interesting things that we could try to do. It's one of the greatest adventures that humanity could ever embark upon. Life has to be more than about solving problems. If all that life is about is solving problems, why bother getting up in the morning? There have to be things that inspire you to, that make you proud to be a member of humanity. The Apollo program is certainly an example of that. It's only a handful of people went to the moon. And yet, actually, we all went to the moon. We went with them vicariously. We shared in that adventure. I don't think anyone would say that was a bad idea. That was great. We need more of those things. Or at least we need some of those things.
Let me now shift to the areas where your businesses are now operating. You have a solar power company, obviously. You have the electric cars, and you have space. Give us, if you would, what you think the potential of solar power is, and you were making your point about the importance of addressing sustainability energy. How you think people should think about energy now, about solar energy and more broadly?
Sure. Well, I think solar power will be the single biggest source of electricity, at least in the United States, by the midpoint of the century.
And that may seem like a bold statement given the tiny percentage that it generates right now, which is on the order of sort of 1%, or less than 1% really. But if you look at the growth rate of solar, that's where it's gonna go. This compound growth is incredibly powerful. But I think anything we can do to accelerate that growth is a good thing, because it means we'll have power as long as the sun shines. And if the sun doesn't shine, we have larger issues.
And is there a way to explain concisely, in terms I might understand, the concept that Solar Cities is applying that will make it successful in a way that previous solar projects have not been?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say that most people don't realize how much the cost of solar panels has dropped. They used to be about $4 a watt 5 years ago. They're now about $1.20. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge drop. And there's obviously this sort of threshold where when solar power is cheaper than conventional electricity, that's a massive inflection point. And electricity costs vary across the country. So you'll see it starts to be better in some places than a small number of places, then a medium, then eventually most places, right? Which I think is what will occur. And I'm not saying solar power will be everything, but I think it'll probably be at least a plurality, maybe a majority by the midpoint of the century. And most of what Solar City specifically is focused on is actually balance of system. Solar City does not make the panel. Solar City is it's kind of like, say, Apple or Dell, where they design the system appropriate to a particular house or office, and they'll do the installation, wiring, the inverter, permitting, and after-sales service, which is about 70% of the cost.
And since I've come from DC only today, where any discussion of solar involves Solyndra scandal, right, government policy, et cetera, what should the government be doing, if anything, about solar now?
Yeah, well, I think the Solyndra thing is somewhat overblown. It's obviously become political football, but not a very good one. I think Republicans should pick up, and I'm sort of moderate, sort of half Republican, half Democrat, if you will, but I'm somewhere in the middle. I guess I'm sort of socially liberal and fiscally conservative, which I think a lot of the country is actually. Yeah. But the thing is that if you look at Solyndra, the specific case Solyndra, private investors lost twice as much as the government, and the investors, the venture capitalists that were involved in Solyndra are some of the smartest venture capitalists out there. They're not fools. So it's difficult to say the government was a fool if you've got some of the best venture capitalists in there investing in it all. It's just startups it's a bit of a numbers game, you know. Right. Typically in Silicon Valley, venture capitalists, if they invest in 20 companies, 1 or 2 will be a big hit, maybe 3 or 4 will be okay, and the rest will not make it. But that's the way it works. I don't think it makes sense for the media to be so focused on Solyndra. There will be other failures too, by the way. It's not, but yeah.
You know, my sense is that people are not differentiating between the making of solar cells and the using of solar cells, right, and the Chinese competition and the glutting of the market on the supply side is what got Solyndra in trouble. They couldn't compete with the falling prices. But you're a consumer of solar cells, right? So how do you see, you know, the Chinese competition and sort of the glut of solar cells on the market? What does that do to you?
I mean, I think what China's doing in the solar panel arena is awesome, because they're lowering the cost of solar power for the world. And they have these huge gigafactories that they created out in the Chinese desert, and with a ton of funding from the Chinese government. So it's like a giant donation from the Chinese government, like, thanks, that's awesome, you know? You know, people sort of complain about Solyndra, but I mean, obviously anyone who's been involved in the venture world knows that you don't bet 1,000. There's some companies that die. The only reason we know about Solyndra is because it became a political football. Right. I mean, there are other solar panel manufacturers that are still doing reasonably well. But it is tough when you're competing. I mean, I think a good rule of thumb don't compete with China with a commodity product. Yeah. You know, you're really asking for trouble in that scenario. And it's really super easy to make
15% efficient or standard efficiency solar panels. It's super easy. It's like easier than making freaking drywall at this point. So it's like, does anybody think we should be competing with China in drywall manufacturing? Okay, probably not. So, so that's the thing. And the hard part of solar power is not the panel. It's actually the whole system. It's basically designing something that's going to fit on a particular rooftop, because you have all these heterogeneous rooftops. Right. Then you've got to mount the system. You've got to wire it up. You've got to connect it with the inverters, connect it to the grid. You've got to do all the permitting. I mean, it's a bunch of like thorny, unglamorous, stupid problems. But if somebody doesn't optimize them, they're still going to cost a ton of money. Right. And a lot of them are really not. They're not fun problems. They're not exciting problems to optimize. But they are the problems that actually matter in the cost of solar power.
So it's really more like like a roofing contractor than it is a semiconductor company.
I mean, what you're doing is you're putting a second roof on a building.
Yeah.
Okay, so and you've got to do it at scale, and then you've got to manage all these systems, because there's still some. I mean, even though the after-sales service is small, when you've got like hundreds of thousands of systems, that's still a lot to manage. And so what Solar City really is a giant distributed utility. And it's working in partnership with the house and business, and in competition with the big sort of monopoly utility. I mean, I think it's like literally power to the people, okay? It's like, it's literally. So I think it's really awesome, because utilities just never had any competition before.
Yeah. Because there are quite significant vested interests in oil, gas, and coal, with enormous amounts of money. It's quite a difficult battle to fight, and you can't expect them to simply roll over and commit suicide or something. They will fight it hard, and they have been.
The National Automobile Dealers Association and several state dealer associations have basically declared war on Tesla, and they are fighting in state legislatures and in the courts to try to hamstring our sales model.
It's really terrible.
Your projections that you showed us earlier for the growth of galleries and showrooms and service centers, are those projections tempered by the opposition from NADA and the like, or?
Right. Well, it is a, the Auto Dealer Association is definitely creating some problems for us, making it harder to get things done. I mean, the fundamental problem is the Auto Dealers Association, or the Auto Dealers keep saying, oh, we should grant them a franchise, but then I ask, okay, can you give me some examples of companies that have granted a franchise, like startup companies, where that's turned out to be successful? It's like, didn't work for Fisker, didn't work for Coda. Well, let's see, I mean, in the last 90 years, when did it work? And there's no good examples. And so I feel like we have to do this directly. And also, our philosophy with respect to service is not to make a profit on service. I think that it's terrible to make a profit on service. And unfortunately, the way that the Auto Dealer Association is set up is that they make most of their profit on service. So this obviously would not be a good outcome. Now, the challenge we face, of course, is that the auto dealers are very strong, very influential at the state level among the legislatures. And I should point out very often, this is not it's not like some small mom and pop operation. It's the giant auto dealers that are the big national auto dealers that are the biggest challenge here. Sometimes people think, oh, we're fighting some set of small auto dealers in the state. No, we're fighting the giant ones that have the big money to spend, not the little ones. But if you look at the opinion poll, if you look at the opinion polls in any state, or nationwide, or anywhere, any opinion poll of anywhere in any context as to whether people want direct sales, the answer is overwhelmingly yes. So in North Carolina or Texas, obviously in California or nationwide, the percentage of people in favor of allowing Tesla to do direct sales varies from a low of 86% to 99%. And in the case of the 86, there was a concerted attempt by the auto dealers to get everyone they could to possibly vote against it. And it still was 86% in favor. So clearly, if democracy was working properly and the legislators were implementing the will of the people, something else would be happening. And there would not be legislation trying to artificially restrict direct sales. You know, right now the Auto Dealers Association is, I mean, they're crowing about the fact that they were able to defeat us in Texas, and that they're, you know, they're making so much progress in North Carolina and stopping us in Virginia. And it's like, you know, I think it's outrageous that they would crow about a perversion of democracy. That's just wrong. So, I think, yeah, I think they're making a big mistake. Yeah, and I think what's actually going to happen is, I think customers are going to lead a revolt on this front, because, I mean, if I was in a customer's position, I'd be like, if some organization was so happy about being able to spend lots of money and pervert democracy in a bad direction, I would fight really hard to sell that company's product. And I think that is what's going to happen. I'd probably worry slightly more about, in the space arena, about some of the big government contractors. They would definitely like to see SpaceX fly. I'm sure I'm being tortured in effigy right now. You know how when you see a movie and like there's the bad corporation in the movie. That's like the big defense contractor. So those are our competition in a lot of cases. So, yeah.
But SpaceX's lack of experience bothers some NASA legends, like Apollo astronauts Neil Armstrong and Gene Cernan. They've testified to Congress that the Obama administration's drive to commercialize space could compromise safety and eventually cost the taxpayers.
Now is the time to overrule this administration's pledge to mediocrity.
You know, there are American heroes who don't like this idea. Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan have both testified against commercial spaceflight in the way that you're developing it, and I wonder what you think of that.
I was very sad to see that, because those guys are, yeah. You know, those guys are heroes of mine, so it's really tough. You know, I wish they would come and visit and see the hardware that we're doing here. And I think that would change their mind.
They inspired you to do this, didn't they?
Yes.
And to see them casting stones in your direction.
It's difficult.
Did you expect them to cheer you on?
So they're hoping they would.
What are you trying to prove to them?
What I'm trying to do is to make a significant difference in spaceflight and help make spaceflight accessible to almost anyone. And I would hope for as much support in that direction as we can receive.
With solar, especially here in California, we're discovering that the 80 solar farm schemes that are going forward want to basically bulldoze 1,000 square miles of Southern California desert. Well, as an environmentalist, we would rather that didn't happen. It's okay on frapped out agricultural land. Solar is wonderful on rooftops. But out in the landscape, 1 gigawatt is on the order of 50 square miles of bulldozed desert. When you add all these things up, Saul Griffith did the numbers and figured out what it would take to get 13 clean terawatts of energy from wind, solar, and biofuels. And that area would be roughly the size of the United States, an area he refers to as Renewistan.
Now, a lot of people would say, well, solar cannot really provide the energy that we need. A lot of people don't perhaps appreciate that solar energy is already the source of the vast majority of Earth's energy. Without solar power, we would be a frozen ice ball at about 3 or 4 degrees above absolute zero. So really all we're talking about for solar electricity is taking the tiny, tiny bit of energy that humanity needs for electricity, which is, I emphasize, is super tiny compared to the amount of solar energy that hits the Earth. You could generate all the electricity that the United States needs with about a 100-mile by 100-mile grid of solar power. So you could just take like a corner of Arizona, and that would be all the energy that the United States needs.
What is new with Professor Kaku these days?
Well, you know, this past weekend, something happened which really disturbed me, and that is the sun is having this temper tantrum, and it's getting worse and worse.
Oh,
you know, we had 5 solar flares erupt last week, 2 just in the past weekend. NASA satellites were just overwhelmed by the size of the flare that came out of the sun. Two flares came out of the sun on Friday and Saturday, and we're headed toward the 11-year sunspot cycle maximum now. And the fear is that one of these solar flares could hit the Earth, in which case all hell could break loose. And,
it's just a matter of time, isn't it?
It's a matter of time. You know, we've had a big one about 150 years ago in 1859. We had a huge solar flare that hit the Earth. Back then we only had telegraph wires, but even they were shorted out. And you could read the newspaper in Cuba at night by the light of the northern lights, the aurora borealis, as far south as Cuba. And from that, we physicists can recalculate how big that solar flare of 1859 must have been. If we were hit with another one like that, it would fry our satellites, communications would go down instantly, power plants would be shorted out, and, you know, we're headed toward the maximum. More and more flares are going out the sun. We had another big one last month, by the way. So far, we've dodged the bullet. So far, we've been able to miss the solar flares. But one of these days, one of these solar flares is going to hit the Earth, like what happened in 1859. And then all hell could break loose.
Yeah, if it's the right size and it hits us on a direct angle, or we are in trouble. And we haven't insulated the grid. Everything could go down. I'll tell you what concerns me too much is what happens if the power goes out? What about all our nuke plants? And we won't have the ability to, you know, they will melt down, won't they?
Yeah, take a look at what happened in Japan. You know, the backup power generators were in the basement. You can't think of anything worse, any worse place to put a generator than in the basement of a building. It was flooded almost immediately by the tsunami. And so the reactor almost instantly was dead in the water. They had no power. And because they had no power, there was no safety systems. And then we had 3 simultaneous core meltdowns in Fukushima, plus the uranium actually liquefied. We've never seen a totally liquefied core before. First time in history. But the Fukushima reactor actually melted totally. And so we could have lots of these around the country if there's a power blackout because of a solar flare. Simultaneously, we lose pump activity, we lose backup power, we lose the ability to control the control rods. It would be a nightmare.
And how long?
Well, it only takes a few hours for a core meltdown to get off the ground. And by the way, at Fukushima, you may ask yourself a simple question. If the core melted completely, then how come we didn't have a China syndrome? And the reason is that in Fukushima, one of the workers disobeyed orders. He was under a direct order not to flush the core with seawater, because that would destroy the core. The utility thought they could revive the reactor still. They had illusions about that. But he disobeyed orders. He made the only correct decision during the first few days. He flooded the reactor with seawater, and he stopped the devastation of northern Japan. He's a national hero.
He is.
And he disobeyed orders.
He may have saved many, many lives.
Oh, definitely. And we could have something similar if we lose power in the United States or, around the planet Earth. If there's a gigantic solar storm, if there's a hurricane from hell from outer space. Now, we physicists went to Congress last year, and we asked Congress for a few $100 million, that's chump change, to reinforce our power plant, to build a backup grid, to make our satellites so that we could shut them down in case of a major flare, or maybe even have safety systems on the next generation of satellites. And we got nothing. Congress just laughed at us. But, we're the physicists of this country. We're the American Physical Society. We're the organization of physicists in this country. And we said to Congress that these are rare events, maybe once in 100 years, once in a 200-year event, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable that one of these bullets is going to hit the Earth like what happened 150 years ago. And when that happens, it's going to be worse than Katrina.
It's an insurance policy. Why would they not jump all over this?
Well, they said things like, times are hard and, the probability of an event is low. But, power blackouts have happened because of sunspot activity in Quebec, Canada, for example, and in South Africa. Certain cities were hit with solar flares, but they were not a direct hit. They were like a grazing blow to the Earth, and we've had power blackouts. Now, see, here's the problem. We're very young in the space age. We've only had experiences with the sunspot cycles for only a few cycles because, Sputnik only went up in 1957. We haven't had experience, but these solar flares have been going on for billions of years. But we never had electricity for billions of years. We've only had electricity for 100 years. And so we have no experience with one of these things. And so it's just like hurricanes. People think that, hurricanes are bad, but they're very rare, so why bother to prepare for them? Then one day it hits you, and then you lose $50 billion like in Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, I think it's foolish that they're not doing this, Mitchell. They should have jumped all over your proposals, and that it should have been implemented right now. We should be building infrastructure right now, insulating the grid, protecting our power plants. It's going to bite us one day. I can feel it.
That's right. And, you can imagine the chaos. If all of a sudden we have power blackouts simultaneously across the country, no rescue crews are going to come in from neighboring cities because they, too, will be knocked out. So you're not going to see ambulances and fire trucks from neighboring cities to take care of us in case of a power blackout. And then food is going to rot in refrigerators, as what happened with Hurricane Sandy. It only takes a few days for food to rot. And new food is not going to come in from the outside because there is no outside. And so food riots are going to start in a few days because people realize that there's no food to eat because all the food is rotten because there's no electricity. And so you can imagine the kind of chaos you're going to have. Now, here in the Northeast, we had Hurricane Sandy. But, we got relief from the outside. The rest of the country was not paralyzed.
That's right.
The airports were up and running in a few days. And so shipments of food, trucks can come in. But can you imagine what happens if there's no outside? That if they, too, are hit simultaneously with one of these solar flares?
And the long-term goal, as I mentioned, the supercharger announcement was, that even if there's like a zombie apocalypse or something, or even if like civilization crumbled or something like that, that the Tesla supercharging stations would still be functional. Now, then let's get to the question of, how do you make life multiplanetary? What are the fundamental obstacles to that? Because it's all well and good if everyone agrees that that's worth doing, but if we can't do it, well, it doesn't matter. So the pivotal breakthrough that's necessary, that some company has to come up with to make life multiplanetary is a fully and rapidly reusable orbit-class rocket. This is a very difficult thing to do because we live on a planet where that is just barely possible. If gravity were a little lower, it would be easy. If it was a little higher, it would be impossible. Even for an expendable launch vehicle, where you don't attempt any recovery, after a lot of smart people have done their best to optimize the the weight of the vehicle and the efficiency of the engines and the guidance system, everything, you get maybe 2 to 3% of your liftoff weight to orbit. That's not a lot of room for error. So if your rocket ends up being just a little bit heavier, you get nothing to orbit. And this is why only a few countries have ever reached orbit. Now you say, okay, well, let's make it reusable, which means you've got to strengthen the stages. You've got to add a lot of weight, a lot of thermal protection. You've got to do a lot of things that add weight to that vehicle and still have a useful payload to orbit. This is, now you're saying of that meager 2 to 3%, and maybe if you're really good, get it to 4%, you've got to add all that's necessary to bring the rocket stages back to the launch pad and be able to refly them and still have useful payload to orbit. So a very difficult thing. This has been attempted many times in the past, and generally what's happened is when people have concluded that success was not one of the possible outcomes, then the project's been abandoned. So it's just a very tough engineering problem. And it wasn't something that I thought, I wasn't sure it could be solved for a while. But then I think just so relatively recently, probably just in the last 12 months or so, I've come to the conclusion that it can be solved. And I think SpaceX is going to try to do it. Now, we could fail. I'm not saying we're certain of success here, but we're going to try to do it. And we have a design that, on paper, doing the calculations, doing the simulations, it does work. And now we need to make sure that those simulations and reality agree, because generally when they don't, reality wins. So that's to be determined. And the simulation that you may have seen in the lobby coming in, which will be posted to our website right around now, will show you a simulation of what we plan to do. Now that simulation is mostly accurate, but there are a few areas which are inaccurate. In some cases, just due to timing constraints, we weren't able to work with the simulation people to get it completely accurate. And in some cases, we're keeping a few technical things under our hat. But it gives you a pretty good idea of what we intend to do, which is to land basically for the first stage, after stage separation, turn the stage around, relight the engines, boost back to the launch pad, and land propulsively on landing legs. And then with the upper stage, after dropping off the satellite or Dragon spacecraft, then do a deorbit burn, re-enter. You need quite a powerful heat shield. Steer aerodynamically back to the launch pad. You don't actually need wings, by the way. This is a common misperception to steer aerodynamically. You just need some lift-over drag number and lift vector, and steer back to the launch pad. Then land propulsively with the upper stage, also with landing gear. So we'll see if this works, but it's going to be certainly an exciting journey. And if it does work, it'll be pretty huge. Because if you look at, say, the cost of a Falcon 9 rocket, which is quite a big rocket, it's about 1 million pounds of thrust. And it is the lowest cost rocket in the world, and even so, it's about $50 to $60 million. But the cost of the fuel and oxygen and so forth is only about $200,000. So obviously, if we can reuse the rocket, say 1,000 times, then that would make the capital cost of the rocket per launch only about $50,000. There'd be maintenance and other things that would factor in there, and fixed costs and some overhead allocation and whatnot. But it would allow for about 100-fold reduction in launch costs. And this is a pretty obvious thing if you think about it as applied to any other mode of transport. You can imagine that if planes were not reusable, very few people would fly. 747 is about $300 million. You'd need 2 of them for a round trip. And yet I don't think anyone here has paid $500 million to fly. And the reason is because those planes can be used tens of thousands of times, and so all you're really paying for is fuel and pilot costs and just sort of incidentals, and the capital cost is relatively small. That's why it's such a giant difference. Or thought of another way, I mentioned that we could probably afford 0.25% of our GDP for making life multiplanetary. That's the cost if you have a fully reusable rocket. The cost if you don't have a fully reusable rocket on the same barometer would be 100% of the GDP. And that would mean no money for food, healthcare, or anything else. And obviously that's impossible. So that's why I think a fully and rapidly reusable system is fundamentally required for life to become multiplanetary, for us to establish life on Mars. Mars is the only realistic option for another planet. Venus being too hot, Mercury being way too hot, Jupiter being a gas giant, and the moons of Jupiter are a possibility, but it's much further out and it's harder in a lot of different ways. And the moon is sort of too small and resource poor to make life multiplanetary. Emphasize not just to have a little base. A little base is not that interesting, but a self-sustaining human civilization is that's on multiple planets, where life could continue even in the event of a calamity on Earth. That is the real thing. Sometimes people say, well, what is the business model for Mars? And sometimes they think, well, can you mine Mars and bring things back? And that is not a realistic business model for Mars, because it's always going to be far cheaper to mine things on Earth than Mars. But I do think that there's a business model where if you can reduce the cost of a flight to Mars or moving to Mars to around the cost of a middle-class home in California, which these just seem to be rising over time. Maybe not recently, but certainly pretty expensive. So maybe to around $500,000. Then I think you would have enough people would buy a ticket and move to Mars to be part of creating a new planet and be part of kind of the founding team of a new civilization. You obviously have to be willing to have quite an appetite for risk and adventure. But there's 7 billion people on Earth now. There'll be probably 8 billion by the midpoint of the century. So even if 1 in a million people decided to do that, that's still 8,000 people. And I think probably more than 1 in a million people will decide to do that. So that's what I think is sort of the Mars business model, if you will. And then ultimately Mars can probably export intellectual property like software and inventions and things like that. If you can sort of beam it back with photons, that's sort of the better way to go.
You've been working on this solar company, Solar City. What's unusual about that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have to have sustainable electricity production as well as consumption. So I'm quite confident that the primary means of power generation will be solar. I mean, it's really indirect fusion is what it is. We've got this giant fusion generator in the sky called the sun, and we just need to tap a little bit of that energy for purposes of human civilization. Most people know but don't realize they know is that the world is almost entirely solar powered already. If the sun wasn't there, we'd be a frozen ice ball at 3 degrees Kelvin. And the sun powers the entire system of precipitation. The whole ecosystem is solar powered.
But in a gallon of gasoline, you have effectively thousands of years of sun power compressed into a small space. So it's hard to make the numbers work right now on solar and to remotely compete with, for example, natural gas, fracked natural gas. How are you going to build a business here?
Well, I'm confident that solar will beat everything, hands down, including natural gas.
How?
It must, actually. If it doesn't, we're in deep trouble.
But you're not selling solar panels to consumers. What are you doing?
No, we actually are. You can buy a solar system, or you can lease a solar system. Most people choose to lease. And the thing about solar power is that it doesn't have any feedstock or operational costs. So once it's installed, it's just there. It works for decades. It'll work for probably a century. And this is, so therefore, the key thing to do is to get the cost of that initial installation low, and then get the cost of the financing low. So that because that interest, those are the two factors that drive the cost of solar. And we've made huge progress in that direction. And that's why I'm confident we'll actually beat natural gas.
So your current proposition to consumers is, don't pay so much up front. Let
Zero.
us pay zero up front. We will install panels on your roof.
Yes.
You will then pay, how long is a typical lease?
Typical leases are 20 years. But the value proposition is, as you're sort of alluding to, quite straightforward. It's no money down, and your utility bill decreases. So it's a pretty good deal.
Never before in human history has the chance to change the global power structure of our society. A revolution of the highest order presented itself to the people so peacefully and with so little bloodshed. A solar power system can not only help you safeguard your planet, but it can help you safeguard your family. And perhaps most importantly, you can put the nuclear industry out of business while saving yourself money in the process. By simply visiting solarcitycalculator.com, you can input your current electric bill and your zip code and get a free anonymous quote to see if solar power makes economic sense for you. And if you may find it in your heart to be so generous, perhaps you would consider making a tax-deductible donation with a portion of your solar savings to the Chernobyl's Children International Fund. In the words of the late great Carl Sagan, it is our fate to live during one of the most perilous and at the same time, one of the most hopeful chapters in human history. Our science and our technology have posed us a profound question. Will we learn to use these tools with wisdom and foresight before it's too late? Will we see our species safely through this difficult passage so that our children and our grandchildren will continue the great journey of discovery still deeper into the mysteries of the cosmos? That same rocket and nuclear and computer technology that sends our ships past the farthest known planet can also be used to destroy our global civilization. It is as if there was a God who said to us, I set before you two ways. You can use your technology to destroy yourselves or to carry you to the planets and the stars. It's up to you.